Northern India, 1857. An empire governs, confident, structured, certain of its permanence. But beneath the surface, resentment has been gathering. Not in speeches, not yet in gunfire, in small insults, in cultural disregard, in the quiet erosion of respect. Liberty is rarely granted. It is demanded and paid for. In 1857, that payment would be immense. Greetings all. Hope you've been well since we last spoke. Drop me a comment and tell me what you appreciate about this video or the last. Helps keep me sharp as well as confirm what requires change. Was a complete novice last week. Hope you see the improvement this week. Whatever you're at, stick at it. Welcome to the Rebellion, Rose. Right, today's film is regarding the Sepoy Rebellion, or First War of Independence. What happened, and why people think a firearm cartridge started it. More later. Let's start with the East India Company. Established in 1600 in order to foster trade links within South Asia, first factory had been established in Maisalepatnam. Over time, the BEIC came to control large tracts of the country, with a large standing army, sometimes bigger than the British Army, as well as political and economic power. Achieved through conquest as well as convenient alliances, the company ended up quasi-political power. Granted a royal charter which provided the company a monopoly on exporting from the continent, expansion was rapid. Originally aiming to provide silks, textiles and other goods, the conquest of Bengal quickly extended this to include silks, indigo, as well as goods such as those derived from the poppy plant, with taxation to add on top. So by 1857, the year of these events, the pomp of the BEIC had been and gone. Long gone were the glory days where they controlled half of Britain's trade, with tea, no surprise, and that pesky poppy accounting for a majority of it. People think that a rifle, or the cartridge used, was the catalyst for the whole affair. Here's what most don't know. It had been brewing for decades, from the late 1790s, when India's vast size and the East India Company's small numbers increasingly ensured that recruits came from Indians from the varying regions. The 1820s brought in the abolition of sati, outlawed in 1829, socially signalling that the state would interfere in customs. Legal reforms in 1832 and 1833 uniformed and centralised law, and by extension authority, expanded English legal concepts such as increased jury eligibility, displaced local customary law, the arbitration traditions that had been taking place for hundreds of years in some cases. For Hindus and Muslims that used to proceed over these events, it signalled erosion of inherited authority. As annexations grew, the Religious Disabilities Act was passed, stating that if a Hindu converted to Christianity, they wouldn't lose inheritance rights, which had or could have led to loss of family property. Orthodox communities saw this as protection of conversion by the state, the weakening of caste enforcement, and legal encouragement of Christian expansion. By the 1840s, annexation of land had started to increase, culminating in the period 1848 to 1856, the East India Company being led by Lord Dalhousie. This is what started the tinder smouldering, changing the political map of India, whilst destabilising the social order that sepoys came from. He formulated a doctrine that stated if a princely ruler under company control died without a natural heir, male heir, his state would lapse to company control. Adoption had long been recognised in various Indian traditions as legitimate succession, promoting stability and continuity. Unless explicitly approved, Dalhousie refused to recognise adopted heirs, an example being Rani Lakshmibai, whose adopted son was denied recognition, resulting in the annexation of Jhansi. Beyond the political, this meant the dismantling of court structures and court cultures, nobility being pensioned or dismissed, Elites displaced and armies disbanded. Thousands lost status, employment, and patronage. Awadh was a different case. Its ruler, Wajid Ali Singh, ousted on the grounds of misgovernment, the claim being that the Nawab was corrupt and inefficient. The truth was the usual: money and the removal of a semi-autonomous buffer state. Dalhousie was not just a conqueror, even though it changes little. He was trying to modernise with the inefficient methods of the time. Many urban elites and reformers often welcomed some of the earlier reforms mentioned, including the 1856 Hindu Widows Remarriage Act. This was not India versus Britain. It was reformist modernism versus traditional structures, centralised law versus local custom, with the Bengal army drawing heavily from the more conservative rural regions. Awadh mattered because it had cultural prestige. Lucknow was a refined courtly centre, and many of the Bengal army sepoys were recruited from here. These land settlements directly affected the villagers. Please take a moment to subscribe. It's critical for small channels to grow, such as ours. Thank you. As an Englishman, this period of time is a tricky one to navigate, an understatement. So I'm going to keep it straight down the pipe. This period of time was an era of time where great power politics ran rife, something that we have seen started to manifest itself again after the age of international law. This era resulted in economic exploitation, cultural and religious insensitivity, and heavy taxation. That is where a normal overview of this would end. A couple of other realities must be mentioned, however. Firstly, as we have seen with the various conflicts raging, I support any person's right to defend their country and land. It's also difficult to judge others when we didn't exist in their situation and era. Now, are the following self-serving? Well, pretty much everything is, isn't it, if we're honest? Nothing will ever replace the ability to self-determine. However, these are some of the benefits that the British helped install. Railways, telegrams, postal services, roads, ports and bridges, legal codes, educational and social reforms, health reforms including hospitals and vaccinations against smallpox. The truly most important one for me, though, was the rise of Indian nationalism, where exploitation, Western education and political ideas contributed to the rise of the cause for independence. I had this where others would shy away, to inject some real into these proceedings and give nuance and context, something I expect you would all expect from me. Now, it's pretty critical that I start off by saying this was never substantiated, and I have not found anything to confirm this was correct. Perception is reality, though. What I'm about to relay was denied by the British, but of course it would be. However, it must have had some validity, as the 1859 reformulation changed the recipe below to just beeswax. The musket in use at the time was the Enfield P1853 rifle, or the snazzy name of rifle musket to be precise. And it was rumoured to have a cartridge that had been lubricated with pig or cow grease to stop fouling, which Hindu and Muslim soldiers vehemently rejected due to their faith. As the cartridge had to be bitten for the ball to be exposed and then dropped down the barrel, this increased the unhappiness and helped to show cultural insensitivities from the British, as this could have been resolved earlier. Added to this tension by the General Service Enlistment Act of 1857, it required sepoys to serve overseas if required, a complete misunderstanding of culture from the British. A powerful social and ritual belief existed with high caste Hindu communities in North India, especially in the areas that formed the core of the Bengal army, called Kali Pani or Black Water. Ritual purity was tied to food practices, water sources, commensality or who you could eat with, and physically separating yourself from ritually impure environments. Crossing the sea was believed to break these boundaries and force contact with foreigners, whilst also requiring the eating of food not prepared within caste rules, as well as making daily ritual following impossible. Losing caste status could include loss of marriage prospects, exclusion from village community, ostracism, or loss of inheritance. For a sepoy serving, this meant loss of place at home. Crucially, not all Hindus held identical views. Flexibility and constraints differing. This is one reason why the Bengal army reacted with such rage. The spark that most people referred to occurred on the 29th of March 1857 in Barrackpore. Mangal Pandey, after refusing to use the new cartridge, fired upon two British officers, Lieutenant Bohr and Sergeant Major Howson, before turning the rifle on himself. No mean feat in those days, and hitting himself in the chest as well as suffering a sword wound. I wonder whether there is more to this, as I doubt very much a man could reload and fire twice, hitting two men, before then reloading and firing again. Either that, or he was sharp himself. Everyone survived. Mangal's attempt to end his situation suggested awareness though. Maybe he expected help from his fellow soldiers, or he moved too soon. How much of it was the cartridge versus broader issues is unclear. Pandey was arrested, court-martialed and executed on the 8th of April 1857. His regiment, the 34th Bengal Native Infantry, was eventually disbanded. The execution was meant to reassert authority. It deepened distrust instead, increasing tension among sepoys. What is clear is what followed in May. The embers burned for a full month, before on the 10th of May, sepoys in Meerut who had refused the cartridges were imprisoned. Fellow soldiers revolted, released them, and killed the European officers before marching on Delhi. Arriving on the 11th, they declared loyalty to the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah II, proclaiming him as symbolic leader. This consolidated the fragmented military unrest into a political revolt. Lucknow saw attacks on the city by sepoys in May, seizing control of it. Bitter and brutal combat followed, with the British falling back to the Residency, a fortified complex that civilians and soldiers found themselves in. Begum Hazrat Mahal was the Begum of Awadh. A Begum is a title for a Muslim woman during the time, meaning higher official, and she became one of the focal figures in this region. Her supporters included Rajas, Hanumant Singh, and was commanded by Raja Jalal Singh. Seizing the city, the Begum took power as regent on behalf of her young son, who she had declared the Wali or ruler of Awadh. In Kanpur, Nana Sahib, the adopted son of a deposed Maratha leader, mobilised large numbers of support against the British authorities. This was one of the most intense regions of the conflict, becoming emblematic of the war's ferocity. On the 6th of June, so almost a month after the initial events, sepoys rebelled, resulting in the massacre of British civilians and clashes between soldiers, leading to the brutal siege of Kanpur, which lasted weeks. This resulted in severe deprivations of the people within the city. British and Indian troops finally broke the siege and carried out horrific reprisals. Large numbers of suspected rebels were hung or shot without trial, with many of these executions being carried out in public in order to instill fear. Tactics that are normally associated with the US in Vietnam or Germany during World War II, such as massacres of villages that were suspected to be aiding the rebels, burning of property and farms belonging to suspected rebels in order to punish local populations and prevent further uprising. Incredible how history repeats. After the siege, troops launched revenge attacks on the city, resulting in very significant civilian casualties, as was a systematic assault to reclaim the city. By July, Bakht Khan arrived in Delhi, a seasoned artillery commander who had marched circa 150 kilometres from Bareilly. Arriving with troops, he organised a cannon, assuming a leading role in the defence of Delhi. By midsummer, the uprising had structure, with increasing British counterattacks also. The end of July saw the fall of Kanpur, the initial rebel successes under Nana Sahib, leading to brutal reprisals before British reoccupation. September saw Delhi fall, a prolonged siege required to capture the city, followed by British troops storming the city and heavy casualties following. This was a decisive point, the symbolic heart of the rebellion being lost. Lucknow was captured in November, meaning British troops and civilians had to endure 7 months of food shortages and attacks. Finally broken when relief forces arrived, reprisals were once again invoked, with the added punishments of large fines, males being forced to serve in the British military in other rebellious areas, and detention camps where rebels were imprisoned without charge and possibly tortured. So you can see how long this rebellion occurred for. The next place we'll look at is Jhansi. The Queen of Jhansi, Rani Lakshmibai, became another focal point for the people. After the annexation of Awadh and the dissolution of her state due to the doctrine of lapse, she became one of the central figures when the city revolted in March 1858, almost a year after the initial catalyst. She rallied forces and civilians to her cause, defending the city against the British siege. By April, the city had fallen. The Rani managed to escape, however, fighting several more battles against the British. July 1858 saw the formal end of the rebellion. As we have witnessed, freedom is built on the planks and supports of those who stepped before us, those that paved the way and beat the track. This event felt across the country, laid the groundwork for the British East India Company to be dissolved, resulting in Britain taking direct control of India and the Raj. I believe that all these incidents helped accelerate the spread of nationalism within the country and paved the way for the future freedom fighters. I appreciate those watching at the end. I'm looking to do a Q&A over the next week or so. Could you leave any questions that you may have in the comments, and I'll answer as many as possible. Will also let me see you made it to the end. Best of luck to you.